Welcome back, folks, to the fourth episode of Absolutely Killing It here as Austria, where this episode we're going to be focusing on the union primarily over Hungary. But I just want to say that I wish I mentioned it in the previous episode or sooner. I have taken diplomatic ideas, and our second idea group is going to be religious. But before I move on from that, guys, it has occurred to me that diplomatic is absolutely invaluable. In the past, I used to take influence ideas for obvious reasons. It's just a strong group in general, and the aggressive expansion reduction is really helpful. However, it has occurred to me from learning by playing my experience that diplomatic is so much more powerful. If there is anything that I could introduce to the kind of meta, the consciousness of people throughout the series, apart from the obvious war score reduction and vassalizing the Scandinavian nations, uh, you will see. This is all that I'm going to say. If you don't know why, you will find out in a future episode why diplomatic, in my opinion, should be the absolute standard for every Austrian or Catholic emperor playthrough. With that being said, the second group, of course, is going to be religious, because at some point we're going to be dealing with the Reformation and we're going to want to do our best to combat it, and that includes having the missionary strength to convert those centers of Reformation, but also just a good idea in general. So here immediately I'm beginning to fabricate on the Papal State for a future war, but of course I have declared over the Hungarian throne now that my truce is up. Now, with that being said, this is the one war which, in a sense, was a little bit easy, which I'm grateful for, because my other two wars were quite difficult, more difficult than they could have been. And the reason, of course, that this is easy in my game is because Hungary is trying to defend the Teutonic Order and he's getting focused out by Poland. Now, it does just so happen that the Poles do take, I think, one or two provinces, and that's a bit of a shame, because more often than not you will gain the full brunt of Hungary without having to, reconquest or anything like that, or worry about that border. In my case, I just allowed Poland to have it, and I wanted to continue being friends with him later into the game. He's currently my ally, and I just let him have that land as I planned to PU him later. But it does make a little bit of border gore. Either way, my tactic for dealing with the Hungarians, guys, the good news with the Hungarians is that they lose their general regardless of what they do at this stage of the game. They most likely do not have their superb general that they begin with. And it's going to be important, just so you guys know, to check what decision they make previously and how high their military skill in particular is with their leader. It's either going to be really good, like 6 on their leader of their country, or 0, or very low, or 1, up until this point. It's quite important that you understand that, to make sure that he's not way ahead of you in military tech. I mean, there's not much you can do about it. Just be aware, if he is ahead, that you're going to have to be very careful and very meticulous with your engagements. But either way, you're going to notice, from my experience, quite consistently his alliances are not going to be extremely powerful. He most likely is going to have diplomatic relations, just like he does this time around in Italy, grabbing sort of whoever he can on the fly, because we did a good job deterring him from grabbing very strong allies like France at the beginning of the game by actually allying him ourselves and then breaking our alliance at a later date. My tactic is usually to focus out his allies, and even more so this time around, because he's mostly completely sieged down by Poland. So I'm just going ahead and sieging out his allies, and waiting for my opportunity to re-siege his country once the Polish have liberated their occupations. I just want to say also, guys, that my imperial authority is really high here, and we did end up going over 50, which was a little bit disencouraging for me, but it is how it is. And just keep in mind, guys, even if I'm doing it with some inefficiencies like this, then hopefully if you're slightly behind in your own game, or you feel a little bit unlucky, that's a little bit of a motivational boost, if you will, that you don't have to be perfectly efficient to still have a ridiculously good game going. Yeah, that's my tactic usually with Hungary, is to try to eliminate his allies, hopefully if they're smaller nations. And then you have to be very careful of the fact that he has a very nice terrain advantage on pretty much all of his forts, guys. All of his forts are on hills and mountains, which means, if he rushes in to defend his fort, you're in trouble fighting him, quite frankly. He does have that cavalry bonus in the beginning of the game, so he's quite formidable. My tactic is to take everything that is not going to flip back via those forts, and to actually take his capital city, Pest, which of course is the war goal, and you're kind of going for a length of war against him, but it is going to take, I believe it's 60, I think, if I remember correctly, war score cost to PU him, either that or 80% war score, which is quite a large amount. And what you'll probably find is that I like to basically trade with him, trade forts. At this stage, if you have Bohemia, then you have quite a decent amount of forts, and what you'll most likely find is that if you're sitting all together and you're kind of carpet sieging in a nice consolidated manner across his country, working towards his capital city, needless to say, his war exhaustion is going to be really bad. But if you're all sitting together, he's most likely, if you have more formidable forces, larger stacks, he's most likely going to walk off into Bohemia or your country and try to siege down forts. And that's when I would focus on like the southern region, for example, and try to do 2 forts at the same time, but also occupy all the provinces around those neighboring forts. Either way, yeah, it looks like the Poles just took 1 province. It's pretty self-explanatory. You might have some trouble, but very similar to Venice, the Venetian War. If his alliances are stronger, like he has Florence and more nations, the good news of that is that separate piecing those nations is going to result in more money. Don't be afraid, guys, to go a little bit ham. And there has been some stages throughout my various playthroughs where I do have a large amount of debt, but I do manage to pay it back. Now, with that out of the way, it's pretty self-explanatory that I'm going to win this war here. Hungary was quite at a large disadvantage, having his country entirely sieged down by the Poles. I just want to talk about another thing that people have requested or inquired, and that is, you can see the little tab up there where there's unlawful territory owned inside the empire. Of course, members of the empire are fighting amongst themselves, and some people have asked me what is the tactic that I utilize against this, because you'll notice that I haven't gone into a war against the members of the empire trying to keep them deconsolidated or trying to split them up into individual nations. Basically, my tactic is that I demand territory only to release one province miners, or to release a new nation, a new prince. And maybe there are some exceptions, but I almost always only demand unlawful territory if it is going to result in a new prince being returned. And the reason is because you gain a truce if you demand them. You have to be very careful and keep an eye on the wars. Very often a nation goes to war and they take a province, and if you are just nonchalant and you demand lawful territory, then you'll notice that they'll continue the war and they'll very often take more land. And it's very important that you're meticulous about it, and it's all about returning princes. At the end of the day, returning a province to another nation, the empire, does nothing for you in terms of imperial authority. With that being said, I actually pretty much don't participate in civil war inside the empire. If a nation does manage to swindle a province or another nation, then I just let it be. And I am emboldened by the fact that I know I'm going to crush the religious wars, and I'm going to add a lot of territory to the empire. That is what ultimately I'm going for, and not necessarily having a tremendous amount of princes. I don't waste my own time fighting wars inside the empire, as I have other things to do. And I just want to say in that regard, guys, that also make sure to improve relations with nations if they're very close to returning provinces but they're not going to. You can actually bridge that gap very often whilst they're trying to core up the province and return it just by improving relations. So make sure to check how close they are to returning it if they're not going to return it. But with that being said, as you can see, Pretty standard stuff here. Knocked out the Hungarian Union, and we have both the Bohemian and the Hungarian Union, and we're not too worried about the inheritance. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. See you next time.